As the U.S. Supreme Court protects minors from transgender mutilation, certain woke hospitals are still playing God with children's sexuality. I'll talk about it next on The Tom Roten Show.
Free speech is non-negotiable. Tyranny cannot coexist with freedom. Lies must be exposed. The truth will not be canceled. This is The Tom Roten Show.
Hi, everyone. I am the straight shooter, Tom Roten. Thank you for finding the program on your favorite podcasting platform, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart. Wherever you find podcasts, simply search for TomRotenShow.com. I share every episode on my social media platforms. Follow me there at Facebook, LinkedIn, and X at Tom Roten, TomRoten. The Tom Roten Show is brought to you in part by MOVCAC.com, working to build an informed electorate. And I hope you'll check out their website. I hope you'll join the movement. I think you'll find that you line up with their core values, which are to protect the sanctity of life, restore voter integrity, the right of free speech, the right to keep and bear arms, protect the innocent, and medical freedom. And speaking of protecting the innocent, right on their homepage at MOVCAC.com, they've got an article about members of MOVCAC testifying in favor of a West Virginia bill aiming to restrict minors' access to pornographic materials. As you remember, this has been debated in the West Virginia legislature. The Republicans there need to really step up and pass this bill that gets obscene materials out of the public schools and out of the libraries and out of the eyes of little children. It's ridiculous. And I hope you'll go to MOVCAC.com and join the movement. I really appreciate their sponsorship of the Tom Roten Show. And today we're going to be talking about something along those lines of protecting the innocent. My guest, Will Hild from the Consumers Research. He's the executive director. He's going to be talking about, yes, the U.S. Supreme Court decision to uphold Tennessee's ban on transgender surgeries for minors, but also continue to expose Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, and other major hospitals for continuing to incorporate DEI and this woke ideology into their practices. It's almost as if that's more important than saving people's lives and helping people get well. They're playing God with children's sexuality. They certainly are. And I'm thankful that the West Virginia legislature this past session at least did ban the puberty blockers and the castration pills along with the transgender surgeries that they took care of a couple of years ago. That's done. That was signed into law by Governor Morrissey, and I'm thankful for that. And it's been done in other states as well, but yet these woke hospitals continue to ignore the law, to ignore this Supreme Court decision, to ignore the president's executive order. Folks, these people need to be held accountable for several reasons. Number one, it's barbaric. Number two, they're using our tax dollars to do it, and they're tax exempt at the same time. I mean, I have relatives that are going to and from Cleveland Clinic all the time. I had a sister-in-law go and come back earlier this week. I have a sister that's going next week for a different issue. My dad went there. My wife's been there. My mom went there when she was alive. Listen, we've grown to count on the Cleveland Clinic for excellent health care, certainly for many issues, but we want to know that they're caring for those issues, those problems, not dealing with this woke DEI ideology. It's sick and disgusting. We'll talk with my guest, Will Hild, Executive Director of Consumers Research, about this issue and the SCOTUS decision. The Tom Roten Show is driven by Martin Transport, now hiring Class A CDL truck drivers for their Canova, West Virginia terminal. Apply online at martintransport.com. That's martintransport.com. So this was a great great ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court this week, upholding a Tennessee ban on transgender surgeries for minors. And we had an executive order already. A lot of states have dealt with this. But in defiance, a lot of our nation's top hospitals, supposedly top hospitals, have continued to provide what they call gender-affirming care to children. And we've been getting a lot of good information on this in past episodes. In fact, 4 months ago this week, I talked to Consumers Research Executive Director Will Hild, and he's back with me now to talk about this. Will, how are you, sir?
Great to be with you. Thanks so much for focusing on this issue. We think it's really important to patients.
Yeah, and people in our region here, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, constantly having to travel to Cleveland Clinic. And last time you and I spoke, we were asking the question, is Cleveland Clinic the wokest hospital in the nation? And it seems like so. And I went back, I was listening to it. I had a sister-in-law who was going to Cleveland Clinic for some heart issues that week back in February, and she just went back again and just got back. A lot of people in our region make that 3, 4, 4.5 hour trip, depending on where they are, to the Cleveland Clinic, sometimes multiple times a year for needed treatment. And so, we count on that. We're counting on the expertise of these medical professionals. And unfortunately, and maybe it's not with all of them, but it's certainly with the higher ups, the CEOs and so forth. They want to push this woke ideology, which includes what's something that's illegal, the gender-affirming care, the transgender surgeries on children.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just this past week, we followed up with our reporting on the Cleveland Clinic with a consumer warning about a number of different health systems, including Cleveland Clinic, but also including places like Henry Ford Clinic and the Vanderbilt Medical System in Tennessee, for basically, hitting this trifecta of wokeness, focusing not on patient care and making sure that they continue to have the best of the best in all the areas, like you mentioned with your sister who's got a heart issue. That's what we really want these health systems focused on, which is why they're subsidized both by the state and the federal government. Our taxpayer money goes to these. They have a 501c3 status in most cases, meaning they don't pay taxes either. So they're sort of double subsidized, both directly and indirectly through the tax code. And yet, instead of focusing on patient care, which is why they receive all of these subsidies, they are increasingly focused on all these woke issues, things like net zero targets, which is this green boondoggle nonsense that all it can do is raise costs for patients and for taxpayers. They've been incorporating DEI, both in their patient care, but also in the hiring and promotion internally, which of course no one wants their doctor picked because of the color of their skin or their genitalia. They want them picked on, are they the best of the best that they could find to treat them? And then last, but certainly not least, as you noted, because of this ruling, which I might add was Skrmetti, the Attorney General of Tennessee. That was one of the names in the suit because of what was going on at the Vanderbilt health system. The mutilation of children led to the law that was then sued and thankfully upheld by the Supreme Court. So you've got all these health systems that are focusing on these woke issues instead of focusing on their core reason why they're being subsidized by the federal and the state. So we issued this consumer warning to hopefully alert patients and consumers. They really need to be keeping an eye on these institutions and talking to their elected officials about how important it is that they push back and make sure that these things are focusing on what they should be focused on.
You mentioned the Tennessee AG jumping on this, and rightfully so. Have you heard anything from other state attorney generals that have gotten involved, particularly talking about the Cleveland Clinic? Dave Yost, the attorney general there, who recently just dropped out of the governor's race. He may not have had to drop out had he been standing up against this.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we'd love to see more activity from particularly the attorney generals in these states. I think it's unfortunate that there hasn't been more investigations into these hospitals. It's very blatant. I mean, it's funny. I think when I was on before, I mentioned that I got a cease and desist letter, a legal threat from the Cleveland Clinic and their attorneys that day as we were running ads. What's funny about that is that nothing that we were reporting came directly from us. It was all from either their own websites, the Cleveland Clinic's own bragging about what it was doing, or third parties that were using publicly available information, like the stuff about how they were transing kids came from the insurance reimbursement requests that they were putting into Medicare and Medicaid and private insurers. So it's not like it's just me saying it. This is all stuff that often came from their own website. And so the fact that there hasn't been more government activity looking into these hospitals, I think is unfortunate. I would love to see Attorney General Yost look into this. One of the things we called for, we sent a letter with this consumer warning to the attorney generals and governors of every state where these hospital systems that are doing this kind of stuff reside, and also to the federal government. I'm glad to see, of course, that the Trump administration seems to be taking this stuff a lot more seriously than the Biden administration did for obvious reasons. And I'd love to see maybe someone like Brett Shumate, who's Department of Justice Civil Division, or Harmeet Dillon, who's Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, look into what's going on in the victimization of children, or look into the blatant violations, in my opinion, of civil rights law. Looking at people based on the color of their skin and their genitalia, not based on their meritocracy, their competence, their skill. So, unfortunately, the answer is no. I have not seen Attorney General Yost look into the Cleveland Clinic yet, but hopefully, with this most recent sort of re-upping of the issue for him, maybe we'll see some action.
Yeah. So, Will, you Consumers Research had the ads that you mentioned there, Cleveland Clinic Exposed. Is that still going on? And what type of reaction have you gotten? I mean, were there a lot of people who's like, wow, I had no idea that they were involved in all this DEI stuff?
Yeah, people were frankly shocked to see the facts laid out as they were. And we're going to continue to keep the heat on. One of the things we've been running, we've probably run about $10 to $15 million of ads against woke companies and organizations since we started pushing back on woke capitalism 5 years ago. And no entity we've ever hit should ever feel like they're done. We've hit Coca-Cola probably 3 or 4 times. We've hit BlackRock a bunch of times. And if Cleveland Clinic, we're going to keep an eye on them. And if they continue to engage in this kind of insanity, they are absolutely still under our target. If we don't feel that enough has been done to push back, we're going to continue to do that. So they should not sleep soundly at night thinking, oh, it's over, they've hit us, they'll never hear from us again. As you noted, we hit them in February, and we've just alerted the federal and state government to their activities just this week. So no entity that we've ever looked at should feel that they've gotten away with it just because they are waiting us out.
I think it deserves extra mention here. You're talking about nonprofits. So they're not paying taxes. These are entities that get government funding, taxpayer funding as well. And that's so important. I mean, it's one thing when you're involved in this and you're just a private business, but when you're taking the people's money and you're promoting this diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're promoting things like the trans surgeries and so forth for minors. We didn't get a vote on that. That's not right. They should not be doing that, and that's where consumers really need to be on high alert.
That is an excellent point, and that's exactly right. When you get we're a 501c3, so I know what the process looks like. When you get tax advantage status, when you get a nonprofit status, so you don't have to pay income or corporate taxes, you get that because you tell the government that you have a special purpose and you articulate that for them, and they have to prove that. And my understanding is that Cleveland Clinic exists to treat patients medically. But if you listen to the CEO, he was quoted as saying that healthcare is only part of our mission. Well, that's news to the federal government, right? That's not why they were given the tax advantage 501c3 status. They were given it to do medicine, to treat patients. And so we're subsidized. It's double subsidized. It's subsidized indirectly through the tax code of not paying taxes. And then Cleveland Clinic, along with the other health systems we mentioned in this consumer warning, receive direct funding from both the state and the federal government. And you might say, well, I like the fact that Cleveland Clinic is doing all this research and I want it to continue. I agree with that. I think it's it's great that these health systems are coming up with new treatments and new procedures. The problem is, if they're doing DEI, if they've injected DEI into all that, are they picking the best researchers, or are they picking researchers based on race and sex, right? So you see how when they start going down this road of focusing on other things, right, it is deleterious to the core mission that they're supposed to be doing on behalf of patients and behalf of the federal and the state government money that they're getting. It's not just this compartmentalized thing where you think, oh, okay, well, they're just doing this DEI nonsense. Okay, that's annoying and I don't like that. But as long as they're doing the heart research and the cancer research, then so be it. DEI is insidious. It is like a cancer, to stretch the medical analogy here. It gets into everything. It wants to dominate everything. These DEI departments, if you look at their own press, talk about injecting DEI into every aspect of what an organization does. So if you want them to do that cancer research, that heart disease research, that diabetes research, you don't want them to be doing DEI, because you want to make sure that they're getting the best people to do that research so they can come up with good results.
Yeah. So as your organization points out, in 2023, the Cleveland Clinic CEO, Tom Mihaljevic, was paid more than $7 million. Nobody's taken up an offering for this guy. But he is living off the people's money. How can a stronger message be sent to maybe from within remove this guy?
That's a great question. And I look at the board of Cleveland Clinic, and I do think it's incumbent upon them to take a real look at what's going on inside the hospital. I think it's unfortunate when you look at, who's on the board. It's a lot of who's who of Ohio politics and business leaders. And I think that sometimes they get invited onto these boards and they think, oh, it's nice. Everyone I'll look good and it'll make my resume look good, and I'll look like upstanding person in the community. The problem is you have to take that role seriously. You have to take the oversight that is incumbent upon board members seriously. And it doesn't look like the board of Cleveland Clinic has been doing that. So I would just chasten them to look closely at what's happening inside these hospitals, and not just say, oh, well, it's a nonprofit, so it must be doing good things. Nonprofits, as this report proves, can be doing some very nefarious things. And so it's incumbent upon the board, as well as federal and state government officials, to look into that.
So I've been focusing on Cleveland Clinic. Consumers Research has not only focused there, but also, as you mentioned, Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Henry Ford Health, Memorial Hermann Health System. Okay, and Johns Hopkins, their children's hospital in Maryland. Now, this is really troubling. So again, these are they're giving puberty blockers and hormone therapy at Johns Hopkins. This is mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's a direct violation of the Hippocratic Oath. I don't believe you can be a physician and be ethical and be doing this to children. This is the kind of thing that a child doesn't have the capabilities to consent to, in the same way that we wouldn't let a child sign a car lease or enter into a contract. They shouldn't be making decisions that are going to affect them for the rest of their natural lives, no matter what. And these types of surgeries are irreversible. There's been a lot of propaganda and lies put out by the far left extreme transgender ideology proponents, making it sound like, oh, if they want to decide to go back later, they can do that. Nothing could be further from the truth. Any of these, not just the procedures, the surgeries, but also the injections of hormones, have lifelong consequences. Even if they're ceased or if they attempt to reverse them, there's certain things you can't entirely undo medically, and this falls into that category. So I think it's disgusting. I think there are states, wonderfully, states like Ohio and Tennessee that are making this illegal, and we just need to keep an eye on these hospitals and make sure they're following the law and that they've stopped this. But there are some states, unfortunately, like Maryland, where the Democratic Party supports this kind of insanity. And so it's really incumbent upon federal officials, because they subsidize so many of these health systems, to really lay down the law, much like we've seen in higher ed with universities like Columbia and Harvard that are engaging in anti-white racism and anti-Semitism. The Trump administration has done a fantastic job leveraging the fact that they're so federally subsidized to push back on that. And I would love to see the same thing happen to places like Johns Hopkins, even though they might be safe in their politically in the state jurisdiction that they're in. That doesn't make them immune to pushback at the federal level because of the tax advantage status and because of the federal subsidies that they get directly in the form of grants and money.
Yeah. Memorial Hermann Health System, that's based out of Houston. I guess they had to do that because they want to be able to compete with Houston Methodist. There was a doctor there that was a whistleblower about the transgender surgeries on minors there, and I think they fired him.
Yeah, not only did they fire him, but then the Biden administration tried to come after him with the Department of Justice. I mean, it was an incredibly ruthless attack on somebody who was just trying to protect children. And it shows the sea change. I mean, literally could not have been more of a 180 between the Biden administration trying to protect these hospitals that were violating their state laws in order to mutilate children. They were trying to go after whistleblowers, calling those hospitals out. And now we have the Trump administration who, at least vocally is saying that they're going to come down on this stuff. It's still early in the administration, but I trust that they are going to, especially with Brett Shumate, a new head of the Civil Division in Department of Justice, just confirmed this month. I am very confident that they are going to take this very seriously. And now I think instead of the whistleblowers being afraid of the federal government, I think these doctors, these Dr. Mengelas who are mutilating children, need to be the ones afraid, and rightly so.
Mm. We're talking with Will Hild, Consumers Research Executive Director. The Tom Roten Show is brought to you in part by Panhandle Support Services, offering the most professional and caring in-home personal care and homemaking services in West Virginia, providing superior certified in-home support service to their customers, and they have assisted them in maintaining daily routines. Learn more at personalinhomeservices.com. That's personalinhomeservices.com. So how far-reaching will this Supreme Court decision be? It would seem to me that this indicates maybe some other conservative common sense wins. In West Virginia, we had a Save Our Girls Sports Act pass a few years ago, but still yet this past spring, we had a freshman biological boy compete at the state track and field meet in West Virginia against girls on the girls team. And so our governor, Patrick Morrisey, is hoping that this Supreme Court decision will, trickle down or at least give an indication of how the court's going to rule on that issue as well. At least it would seem that way.
Yeah, I would imagine that the logic would be the same. Certainly, if the state governments are allowed, according to the Supreme Court, to intervene and protect children from, medical procedures that are mutilating them, I would imagine that they certainly have the right to regulate sports, which has been a well-established ability of both the federal and the state government. We have plenty of laws regulating the operation of all kinds of sports, and certainly in their own K through 12 school systems and colleges, you would imagine. I would be shocked if turns out that the states don't have the ability to do that under the Supreme Court. So I do think that this case definitely bodes well for the ability for West Virginia to crack down on that absolute insanity. And I hope that what the Supreme Court decision today also helps is encourage states to pass bans on so-called sex change procedures for children. I think it's absurd that this was ever allowed in the United States. And honestly, within a decade or two, I think we will look back upon this period of time as one of the blackest marks in medical history ever, up there with lobotomies. The idea that we were doing this to children, and especially children, some of them, part of it was the point of it was to do it prepubescent, to prevent them from, that's why they call them puberty blockers. So you're talking about very, very young children, and the idea that you would be, putting them through these kind of procedures is just insane to me. I think it's going to be historically one of the darkest days in medical history.
We need to back up and see how we got here. And one of the ways we got here is you had, a confused child. Look, a lot of preteens and teenage children throughout the ages have been confused about sexuality and other things. A lot of those things pass by, after a few weeks, few months, or a year or so. You get from, the sixth grade to the seventh grade, and all of a sudden things have cleared up. You're not worried about that girl that broke up with you or that boy that won't talk to you if you just give it a little time. But we got panicked parents who listen to some, psychologist or guidance counselor or somebody in the school who convinces mom and dad. They say, "Well, would you rather have an alive daughter or a dead son?" Basically saying, Will, that they're going to commit suicide unless you allow them to have these puberty blockers or some kind of surgery.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And it's been well documented now, this emotional terrorism that these far left transgender ideologists were using to terrorize parents into allowing their children to be victimized in this way. There was a recent report called the Cass Review that looked at a gender clinic in the United Kingdom that has effectively been shut down called Tavistock. And it looked at what was going on inside that clinic. And it was an absolute house of horrors. And I will just note, to your point about children growing out of it or having, going through periods where, maybe they are acting a little funny, and then that's leveraged by these groomers to traumatize these children. One of the things in the Cass Review that they found was that the kids that were being referred to Tavistock for gender reassignment surgeries and procedures had 10 times the background levels of parents being registered sex or convicted sex offenders. So in other words, if you were sent to the Tavistock clinic with symptoms of quote unquote gender dysphoria, you were 10 times more likely to have parents who were registered convicted sex offenders. What that likely means is that what you were seeing was the symptoms of someone who had been sexually or physically traumatized. And instead of treating them, they re-victimized them with this insane ideology. And so very glad that the United Kingdom and Europe in general has actually really led the way. I mean, a lot of people don't realize the vast majority of this nonsense has been shut down across Europe. They were ahead of it. In a lot of ways, it got to them before America, and they're ahead of it, realizing how damaging it's been to children, and they're in the process of shutting it down. I hope we follow suit, because this is just insanity, and it's traumatizing a whole generation of children.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen to this. I mean, in a red state, a Republican-led legislature had to override the demonic Democrat there, the governor, Andy Beshear, who had an executive order last fall banning what he called conversion therapy, which basically, if a Christian family has a son or daughter that's confused about sexuality, they may want to go to a Christian counselor or their pastor. Well, Andy Beshear didn't want that. Of course, he didn't want people going to church on Easter Sunday in 2020 during COVID either. But this guy, he's positioning himself to run for president in 2028, by the way. But Andy Beshear tried to ban conversion therapy in Kentucky. Thankfully, the General Assembly overturned his veto on a bill there that does away with that. I mean, that's how demonic some of these Democrats are, Will.
Well, what's really incredible about that is that at the same time the Democrats are banning so-called conversion therapy, what is transgender ideology and gender reassignment except their version of that? Mm-hmm. In other words, if you have a child that seems to indicate to be some of the stereotypical activities of the opposite sex, that's Democrats saying, well, we're gonna or crazy left-wing groomers saying that we're gonna reassign, that we're gonna convert the child to being from a boy to a girl or a girl to a boy to match so-called what's going on inside of them, which is of course insane. I'll also note one great thing about this, about the Supreme Court ruling, is that I think it will put to bed people on the right pushing back against bans on mutilating children. I want to criticize him because I think he deserves it. A former governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, the legislature there had to override his veto of a ban on mutilating children. And I think that was one of the reasons that he performed so poorly in the Republican primary for president. I mean, he was basically completely ignored because everyone knew that he was a wet noodle and had no spine. If you can't stand up for children, if you can't stand up and say, no, we're not going to chemically and physically mutilate children, surgically mutilate children, then what good are you on anything else? And I think what we saw the consequences of that in the primary. I mean, he's completely politically dead, and that's a good thing. And I hope that other people have taken a look at what happened to him, and we won't see any kind of squishiness from Republican governors like that moving forward.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. There are spineless, wimpy Republicans who have joined in on this nonsense, thinking somehow, I guess, that it's a political win. Clearly, it's not. I mean, you can look at any polling you want in the U.S., and the majority, the large majority of people on these issues about biological boys playing in girls' sports, about transgendering minors and so forth. They're against it, but yet Democrats just keep digging in on it. I don't understand why.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to watch them nail themselves to this mast and go over the falls over this issue that is clearly completely out of step with the American people, and going more out of step by the day. I mean, the more we see, the winners' podium completely dominated in women's sports by men pretending to be girls, right? You have, some of these places now, it's first, second, and third place are all biological men standing up there at a girls' track meet or competition. And at the same time that you see this house of horrors coming out of some of these hospitals, these children who are quote unquote detransitioning, who were victimized while they were underage and now realizing what has happened to them and trying to at least scrape back some level of their femininity or their masculinity, their natural femininity or natural masculinity. I mean, the evidence is only building of how damaging this is, how insane this ideology is. And so I hope any Democrat that believes that it's okay to mutilate children, I hope they're very vocal about that. I hope they run on it. I hope they make that a core part of their political platform, because I think it will absolutely doom them, and rightly so.
Yeah. Listen, I'm a parental rights guy. And I believe parents ought to be the ones making the decisions for their children. If they don't want them to have any or all of the vaccines or all at the same time, I believe they ought to have that right to make that decision on health and educational issues. I think it ought to be up to the parents. And in West Virginia, our legislature passed a parental bill of rights, and I'm thankful that they did. But listen, what some parents are allowing some, crack doctor to do to their children, that's not parental rights. That's child abuse, Will.
100%. There's absolutely no medical reason to ever inject children with the same chemicals that we give pedophiles to chemically castrate them. That's insane. And certainly to remove perfectly healthy breast and penis tissue in order to so-called sex reassign someone, that is child abuse. There is no excuse for it. There's no reason for it. The same. I'm a parental rights advocate as well. My kids go to a private school because I don't want them indoctrinated by the public school system. But there is no legitimate reason to do this. And the same reason we wouldn't let someone wail on their children and beat them up and send them to school every day with black eyes is the same reason we shouldn't let doctors and parents make a decision that it's okay to chemically mutilate a child. It just simply isn't appropriate. I feel bad for the parents who were convinced of this nonsense and like as you said, were sort of emotionally terrorized into doing it. But you also have parents, for the same reason that there are parents who are abusive, who make bad decisions for their kids intentionally. And you have, I think, I'm going back to the CAST review. One of the other things they found is that a lot of the mothers of these kids had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which coincides a lot with what they call Munchausen's by proxy disorder, where you try to draw attention for you. It's a form of narcissistic personality disorder, where you try to draw attention for yourself by having a sick child. So many of these parents have deep psychological issues that's leading them to want a diagnosis of this kind of insanity. And so unfortunately, this is one of those small areas where the state really does need to step in and protect them. And we certainly, to bring it all, to land the plane back all the way around, we certainly don't want our federal and state tax dollars and our tax system subsidizing this kind of activity at some of the most prestigious healthcare systems in our nation.
Yeah. Badmedicine.org is where you can learn more. Badmedicine.org. Will, you mentioned Coca-Cola and your battles there. So it's not just hospitals that we're talking about. So as we finish up here, talk a little bit about what else consumers research is doing to alert consumers about where their money's going.
Absolutely. Well, we've been on a 5-year crusade to push back against companies that are going woke, distracting from their misdeeds in the market and their mistreatment of their customers by cozying up to woke activists and woke politicians instead. And so we've been running multi-million-dollar ad campaigns against companies like Coca-Cola, Nike, Ticketmaster, MLB, Levi's, American Express. We've been making it hurt. And one of the biggest companies I should also know that we go against is BlackRock, which is not a company that most people have ever heard of. It's the world's largest asset manager. It hoovers up state, local, and federal pension funds. It manages a bunch of your states, or it did actually until your treasurer, Riley Moore, now your congressman, did a courageous campaign to get them extirpated from the state. He did a fantastic job with that, I might add. But they are still, unfortunately, managing trillions of dollars, and they use that money to push the companies that products you and services you buy every day to go woke. And so we are constantly calling them out and keeping an eye on them to push back against that. So we're on a complete crusade against wokeness in corporate America and in the healthcare industry. People can visit us at consumersresearch.org or follow me on X at Will Hild. That's WILLHILD.
All right, Will Hild, Consumers Research Executive Director. Always great talking to you. Appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Hey, folks, I want to tell you about a sponsor of the Tom Roten Show. And if you are considering an alternative in education for your children, please listen up. You heard my guest, Will Hild, talking about his children going to Christian school. If you would like to consider putting your little ones in a Christian school, if you want your little ones to be educated, not indoctrinated, if you want them to grow up having a biblical